Welcome to Tigrai Television. I'm Erin Imana. We'll be reading the news for you today. Stay tuned. On Friday, Tigray External Affairs Office issued a statement regarding the release of more than 4,200 prisoners of war that were captured during engagements outside Tigray and had serious illnesses, injuries, or physical disabilities. The office said that the decision by the governments of Tigray is consistent with the Tigray's principled preference for peaceful resolution of the 19 months long conflict. Saron Tigray reports.
On Friday, Tigray External Affairs Office issued a statement regarding the decision of the government of Tigray to release more than 4,200 prisoners of war, including 401 women, as part of its unilateral confidence-building measure. The office said the vast majority of those designated for release were the ones captured during engagements outside Tigray, and those who joined the army in forced conscription in late 2021-2022. It was stated that the government of Tigray had prioritized women who had given birth and those with physical disabilities, either due to illness or injury sustained on the battlefield. On the statement, the government of Tigray called on the international community to extend the necessary cooperation to facilitate the implementation of the decision to release prisoners of war, as the authorities in Addis, having denied even their very existence, cannot be relied upon to extend good faith cooperation in this regard. The office also called on the international community to deploy all tools at its disposal to get the Ethiopian regime to release political prisoners of conscience, and thousands of Tigrayans that are still languishing in jail solely on accounts of their identity, as such a step would go a long way towards creating a peaceful resolution to the crisis in Ethiopia. As part of its decision to release more than 4,200 prisoners of war on Thursday, the government of Tigray has escorted them to bordering areas on Friday.
Office for the Emergency Coordination Center in Tigray says only 6 to 7% of the aid needed on the ground has been able to reach Tigray in a course of 2 months. According to the office head ገብረ እግዚአብሔር Aragawi, only 570 trucks of the expected 3,000 were able to enter. The head also stated that the delivery of medical supplies remains far below required. Winter Kidana has the details.
On March 24, the Ethiopian government had announced a humanitarian truce effective immediately and promised to ensure the delivery of humanitarian assistance to the more than 6.5 million people in Tigray. ገብረ እግዚአብሔር Aragawi, head for the Emergency Coordination Center in Tigray, says that even though more than 3,000 food trucks and mans were expected, only 6 up to 7% of that has been able to reach Tigray over the course of 2 months.
انتزعت يعني رنت الماكينه عم تقدم لي زغلصكوا اما عالت 115 ميجو طرح وسمون 850 هو رحيل على 3000 ماكينه 3200 سسان كا ماكينه خاطر واي اكسبيس كبرنيرو.
Since the humanitarian truce was declared, 115 food trucks per day or more than 3,000 food trucks per month were expected to reach Tigray, but the reality on the ground is different. Especially the first 2 or 3 weeks, only 20 or 21 trucks had arrived, and that would be seen as a great accomplishment that caused a celebration, but that was almost nothing compared to the catastrophe on the ground. So far, and that would be seen as a great accomplishment that caused a celebration, but that was almost nothing compared to the catastrophe on the ground. So far, a total of 574 trucks have reached Tigray, and these are less than 6 to 7% of the assistance expected in 60 days. 410 to 415 of deaths were food trucks, while the remaining carried non-food items such as spoons, ladle, and blanket. The food trucks have come with 16,000 metric tons of food, which covers only 13 to 14% of the 6.3 million beneficiary.
The head says the delivery of medication and medical supplies has even been harder, as planes with small carrying capacities have been the main methods of delivery.
فتناي مناي زمصلو ناوتات مس مدحايتات اساسيرو ببلين ون غبري وصا زمصولو لندي كارغو حزت كارغو چواتا اي.
Planes are delivering medication and medical supplies, but I think that's a joke, because it takes 10 to 20 rounds of a cargo to deliver medications that can be carried at once by a truck. One plane is only capable of carrying 3 to 11 metric tons. The cost to deliver a relief by plane is higher than the trucks. The cost to deliver a relief by plane is higher than the trucks, and that's why it's a joke. Since the medication that is arriving is insufficient and doesn't have diversity, it will not even enough to support 2 hospitals. I think the medical assistance has been forgotten.
The head adds that the lack of fuel remains to be a serious problem in the delivery and distribution of aid.
The critical problem we have is lack of fuel. Because of lack of fuel, most trucks are waiting in border areas for other trucks carrying fuel to help them move.
The head also called on the international community to allow agricultural inputs into Tigray as the farming season approaches.
تايتلنا حز خمس زغبونا يغبرنا تواتات له لا مس fertilizer مس seed مس agrochemicals.
Agricultural inputs should arrive now. The international community should put a pressure on the Ethiopian government to allow the delivery of agricultural inputs like fertilizers, seeds, and agrochemicals. Otherwise, next year will not be any different for the people of Tigray.
The deliberate destruction and looting of health facilities across Tigray, soon followed by an all-encompassing siege that has blocked the delivery of all essentials, including medical supplies, has left close to 4 million people in Tigray, including many with chronic illnesses, on the brink. Our reporters have visited Mahbar Walado Medhan, an association of the HIV-positive patients, and spoke to the chairman, who says above 70 patients have lost their lives since the start of the conflict in November of 2020. Aragawi Garamkel has more.
For nearly 11 months now, the Ethiopian government has imposed an all-encompassing siege on Tigray, blocking the delivery of all essential items, including life-saving medical supplies. This has caused many with chronic illnesses, including those with HIV, to suffer. Mahabar Walado Medhan is an association for HIV-positive patients in Mekelle with more than 2,000 members. Barihu Gabrasgaber, a chairman to the association, says, since the start of the war, more than 70 of its members have been lost their lives, 6 of which were killed by the Ethiopian and Eritrean forces during the 8 months of occupation.
Our association has 2,441 members, of which 961 are male and 1,480 are female. More than 70 of our members have died since the start of the war on Tigray. 6 of them were killed by the Ethiopian and Eritrean soldiers.
Barihu, an HIV-positive patient himself, says that many members have lost their lives due to siege-induced stress, in addition to lack of medication and starvation.
Many of our members have died from stress and starvation. Others have died out of lack of medication. Most of us are living under a lot of stresses for fear of being sick. As for me, I am not worried about today. My great fear is about tomorrow. I always worry if medication will be allowed into Tigray, as I am unable to live without it.
According to Barihu, the Ethiopian government has allowed a limited amount of ART medications that are outdated and with a few months left to be expired.
The ART medicines that have recently arrived in Mekelle are outdated and have only 4 months left to be expired. It seems to me that the Ethiopian government is throwing away what it doesn't need.
According to the World Health Organization, there are close to 4 million people in Tigray in dire need of medical assistance.
A year-long ethnic cleansing campaign, gross violations of human rights, and conflict has displaced over 2.2 million people in Tigray. Our reporters spoke with children sheltered in IDP camps in Shira, who are finding it impossible to fulfill basics such as food and medical supplies, as the Ethiopian government maintains the all-encompassing siege for almost a year now. Haile Gabru has the details.
The war on Tigray has seen the displacement of over 2.2 million people of which 1.2 million are from Western Tigray, an area that remains under an occupation of the allied Ethiopian and Eritrean forces to this day. We visited a camp for the internally displaced persons in Shire and spoke with children displaced from Western Tigray. The children speak about the atrocities Ethiopian and Eritrean forces committed and the horrors they witnessed.
We've seen many people being massacred in front of our eyes while we were crossing the Takaza River.
We have been expelled from our places of origin by the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, Amhara militia, Fano vigilante group, and their Eritrean allies. They have killed civilians and looted all our belongings. They used to call us sons of junta. Tigrayans were ethnically profiled and killed.
The children say that they had been leading a relatively stable life before the start of the war, but all that has been destroyed with the war and the 11-month-long siege that followed it.
We used to eat 3 times a day while we were in Humara. We also had enough clothes to wear. We were attending school properly, but now we're in desperate situation.
We had many cattle. Life was awesome there before the war on Tigray. We used to have 3 meals per day. However, we are leading a terrible life due to the siege imposed on Tigray. Eritrean troops took out all our belongings. Currently, we are here with nothing. There is nothing to eat. We came here with just the clothes on our backs.
These children are just among the many displaced persons in Tigray who have been forced to live under stressful situations.
Violence against Tigrayans has started long before November 4 of 2020 when Ethiopia had formally declared a war on Tigray. We spoke with one former resident of the Amhara region who was displaced from his home for almost 3 decades by an identified armed group in the region. He tells us about the gruesome attack that forced him to leave his home and seek shelter in an IDP camp in Ma'ala, where he is still residing almost 3 years later. Sarun Tigrai has the report.
Mariam Nagasi was a farmer in Armachoho in the Amhara region in 2016. He had been a resident of Amhara for more than 2 decades and says him and his family had built a happy and successful life in the region. But in August of 2016, all this would change. He says armed men told Tigrayans that they had to leave the area, a warning he says him and his family had not received. Days later, these armed men came to his house, looted and destroyed his property, physically assaulted him and left him for dead.
It was in August 18 of 2016. I was on my farm when a group of young men armed with machetes, sticks with nails sticking out of them, and stones came. Their leaders had Kalashnikovs. I think every Tigrayan was told to leave, but I hadn't heard because my farm is a little outside the city. They beat me till I blacked out. They thought I was dead and left me there.
Walla Gabriel says his neighbors found him unconscious, put him on a cart and brought him to Tigray, where he was able to receive medical treatment.
A local resident and his wife found me unconscious on the ground, picked me up and took me to Abdelrafi using a cart, and then finally took me to Humara for medical treatment.
Months later, Walda Gabriel says he decided to return to Gondar after promises by regional authority and the federal government that the situation in Armachoho had improved. But upon arrival, he says he was arrested by Amhara authority and further abused.
When I went back, I found that my house and all my wealth had been burned to the ground. Moreover, the official in Abrahajira 01 Kabele accused me of faking my death. They released my attackers in Soroka and detained me instead. My health started to deteriorate in the prison. My body was swollen. My cellmates complained to the guard and said they couldn't stand to be in a cell with me because of my condition. So the guard took me out and dumped me in the streets.
He says officials in the region did nothing to help thousands of Tigrayans displaced from Gondar in 2016, and in effect encouraged the violence on Tigrayans to continue. At the time, Walda Gabriel had traveled to the capital of the administrative zone in Gondar, only to be told that nothing could be done.
The Warada administrator called and asked the local authorities about my property, my remaining property, as well as those already destroyed. They told them I can sue in the civil court for properties destroyed, but said they couldn't do anything for me in regard to the properties that I had left behind.
Says he stayed in the region hoping that justice would be served until he lost hope and returned to Tigray months later. Walda Gabriel believes that the violence on Tigrayans today is a continuation of the violence him and thousands of Tigrayans witnessed in Gondar in August of 2016.
What we are seeing now, the massacre, burning people alive, and destruction of properties started in 2016.
Walda Gabriel has been sheltered in an IDP camp in Maqala for more than 3 years now. For months, him and hundreds of thousands more like him have not been able to access basics, such as food and medication.
We are struggling to survive every day. 3 people have died here due to hunger. A 4th one is in the hospital.
There are more than 2 million IDPs in Tigray, all unable to access basics such as food and medication due to Ethiopian government's blockade on humanitarian assistance.
The blockade on commercial goods and vital services such as banking has put many in Tigray in a desperate situation. Waini Walda owned a small cafe in Ma'ala and used her income to support her family, but since the start of the conflict that had blocked all commercial goods from coming to the region, had forced her to close her business, unable to pay rent for her home. She is now seeking shelter in an incomplete building in the city, causing illness to her 2-year-old child. Aragay Garumkail has the report.
Waini Walda is a single mother residing in the city of Mekelle. She used to own a small cafe to support herself, but she has had to close shop ever since the start of the conflict because she was no longer able to make profit.
I was known for my breakfast until recently, but then everything became so expensive. Cooking oil, pepper, bread, sugar, everything. It's almost impossible to sustain a business in these conditions.
For months, the Ethiopian government has blocked all forms of transport in and out of Tigray, as well as blocking all forms of commercial goods. But even if items were available in markets, the blockade on banking services in the region has meant that very few in the region can afford what very little is available in the market. Waini is just one of the millions struggling to make ends meet because of the blockade on Tigray. Waini and her son are now homeless, living in unfinished building in Sabakare, in the outskirts of Mekelle.
It's so very cold here. The wind at night blows through the holes here. I try to cover the holes with pieces of clothing, but it doesn't make much difference. There's no electricity. It can get so scary at night.
Waini says her son's health has deteriorated due to their living conditions, but she hasn't been able to get him the necessary treatment due to the blockade.
My son is constantly catching a cold because this house is so cold. Whenever I take him to the health center, they tell me nothing is available. Sometimes I beg and buy him medication from private pharmacies. His eyes also get infected a lot. This house is so dusty.
Waini says that the most heartbreaking part is that she had such high hopes for the future and never thought she would find herself in this position.
I used to save 20 birr every day. I was also hoping to make my cafe a little bigger. I never imagined that I'd end up here. I'm now living on the charity of others.
The blockade on essential goods into Tigray has left many in desperate need, with over 6.5 million people in Tigray in their need of humanitarian assistance. A humanitarian crisis is looming in Tigray as the world stands idly by.
All right, that's it for today. Thank you for tuning in.